Okay, what I want to do today is talk to you about monarch species distribution modeling and risk assessment. My partners in this activity are Kristen Baum, who you've met this morning, James Tracy, Tula Cantola, and Mike Quinn, all of whom are present here today. And my talk is going to be sort of the duck speak version of this topic. And if you want to know the details of what we're doing and how we're doing it, then you can talk with these other individuals later today and tomorrow. All right, so the overall goal of what we're trying to do here is to provide useful information to support a species status assessment for the monarch butterfly. And what I want to do today is talk to you about three things. First, to discuss the approach that we're using for risk assessment for monarch butterflies so that we're all on the same page in terms of what that concept means. Second, to discuss the approach for species distribution modeling, and then look at the application of these two technologies to look at three of the important mortality agents that can affect monarch butterflies, and these include the roadkill story that Kari just mentioned, as well as herbicide and land use management threats, and also to pesticide exposure. So the background here is that this work that I'm reporting to you about today is sponsored by the Office of the Comptroller of the State of Texas, and the project is Investigations of Monarch Butterflies in Texas Using a Spatially Explicit Functional Connectivity Approach. Now, what I want to do is, and this project really stresses two techniques. One is risk assessment, and the other is species distribution modeling. Now, the rationale for this was, when we originally thought about this, how we should approach this project, is based upon the fact that there is a great deal of existing information about monarch butterfly distribution in abundance, as well as milkweed distribution in abundance, and we wanted to capture that existing data in a useful manner, and these two approaches allow us to do that. The project also has another objective, which is a field-based investigation of the fifth generation monarchs in Texas, and that's the work that Kristen Baum is doing. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about what risk assessment is. This information will be on your test, so you need to pay attention. An ecological risk assessment is defined as follows. It's a process that evaluates the likelihood of an adverse ecological effects may occur or are occurring as a result of exposure to one or more stressors. And stressors can be biological, physical, or chemical, and they can be natural or they can be anthropogenic in nature. The formula for this, for risk assessment is risk is equal to hazard times exposure. And so for the case of monarch butterflies, hazard is the mortality caused by an adverse event, and exposure is the likelihood of such an event occurring. Now, it follows that a measure of risk, what we're interested in is the total mortality caused by the various risk factors. And what we're going to look at today are three of these risk factors. One are roadkills, the other is pesticide exposure, and the third is habitat loss. All right, the second technology that we're using today is species distribution modeling. And this is a GIS-based methodology used to produce predictive maps where species are likely to occur or where they're likely not to occur. And the goal is to predict the distribution of species in geographic space on the basis of a mathematical representation of their known distribution in environmental space. And environment is usually defined by climatic and edaphic variables. This approach has several flavors or several synonyms to describe it: environmental niche modeling, ecological niche modeling, predictive habitat distribution modeling, climate envelope modeling are all synonyms for essentially the same approach. So for Monarch risk assessment, the species distribution model, defines the exposure component of that risk model that I gave you. So basically, this tells us this is the arena in which risk is played out. And that's why the first thing I want to do is to describe to you the modeling approach that we've used to define where the insect occurs in Texas, where the flyway here is in Texas. The data that were used for this in this investigation were provided by Dr. Karen Oberhausen of the Monarch Larval Monitoring Program and Dr. Elizabeth Howard with Journey North. So basically, there are three models that we're trying to build here. The first, and the one I'm going to talk to you today about, is the fall migration roost model. In addition to this one, we will develop a spring migration model and a milkweed species distribution model. So let me tell you about the monarch, the phenophase model or the monarch distribution model. As I said, this was based upon data that was provided by Journey North. And this is an illustration of the roost locations for the monarch butterflies throughout the range provided by the Journey North database. The green dots are just the locations for where the roost sites were. The purple dots represent, or what are referred to as pseudo-presence, or areas where there is not known distribution of it. So this sort of defines the general or it defines the general roost sites for monarch butterflies. Now, these data were used along with 13 land use land cover data sources to define the point pattern model for the distribution of monarchs along the flyway. Now, the significance of this is that if you look at the flyway as it was defined by Calvert and Wagner in 1999, the yellow outline represents what that pattern was. If you look at the new version based upon this migration pattern model, you can see that it's quite a bit larger. Both the flyway is larger than what it was originally projected to be. So this now defines what the template is, or what the arena is for looking at risk assessment. And so what I want to do now is go through three different approaches that we're using to address risk there. And the first one is monarch roadkill. I failed to mention Mike Quinn. Mike Quinn is also a part of our program here, and he was the individual that did the heavy lifting in terms of the approach that we've used for evaluating roadkill. Essentially, this is what the issue is. If you look at risk, the risk of monarchs migrating north and the risk of them migrating south are quite different. And so what we're interested in here is the funnel that comes through Texas in the fall, where the existing populations now are all funneled into a fairly small area. And we suspected that roadkills could have an important or be an important mortality agent given that circumstance. So what we did is we stratified the road systems into different classes. So we had highways, primary road systems, and secondary road systems. And then we set up transects along those different corridors. And Mike got out and walked those corridors and evaluated along transects the roadkills that were present. And also recorded the fact that roadkill where they weren't present as well. So this map here illustrates, the green dots illustrate the presence of or the discovery of roadkills. The blue dots represent areas where there were no observed roadkills. The size of the circles is proportionate to the number. Now you can see in this lower part, the lower part right up here, there's a fairly large clustering of roadkills. I've been told not to overstate the importance of that because it was an event that may be a unique or an unusual event where a large population was observed over a period of a week or so along Interstate 10. And so this really created a very large input into the data that were used for this thing. Well, we use the same approach to model these data, and this diagram here illustrates the concentration of roadkills. The purple roads show where the highest hazard is. Now, you can look at, there are two things that are important here from the standpoint of estimating what the extent of the roadkills are. If you look over on the left-hand side of the, or my right, your left side of it, the conservative estimate is about 71,000 monarchs that were killed in this along this road segment. The high end of it is about 355,000. If you extend this concept out for the entire range of the migration route down into Mexico to the final site, and project out what the roadkills will, you see the inside of that is illustrated to my right, and the outside of it is illustrated to the left. So the take-home message is that roadkill mortality to monarch butterflies could be a really substantial component to the overwintering populations, and it's occurring at a time when the population densities are the lowest. So the roadkill mortality is something that needs to be looked at in more detail. We're doing this again in the spring, as well as in we just did it, and we'll do it again in the fall next year, in the spring well. So this is again a likely important source of mortality to monarch butterflies. Second threat that I want to take a look at or present to you today deals with the herbicide land use threat to milkweeds. And these next two stories are really under development. We're trying to gather in a lot of existing information on land use, land cover data, and where milkweeds are and where monarchs are in relation to various kinds of practices that are applied to these, is associated with land use. So, and Tula Cantola in our group is the person that is responsible for the niche modeling work that I just discussed. Actually, James Tracy in our lab is the person that's doing that work, but Tula's doing this herbicide land use study. So this is a map that illustrates the 5 major milkweed species that occur in Texas and where their locations are. You might note that there is some clustering around there. Phooey. Clustering here, what do you think that's all about? The citizens collecting data that live in cities, and so this distribution is probably more broad spread than what we've illustrated here. Okay, this is the distribution of milkweed according to different land uses, and the two that you would expect to have lots of milkweed do. The hay pasture story is a little bit different and perhaps surprising in terms of how little milkweed there is in that environment. Now, what we're trying to do is to take the ecoregions of Texas and looking at the land cover data and superimposing upon that where the milkweed distribution is. And then from that, we can look at the various kinds of practices, for example, improved pastures versus unimproved pastures, and look at the impact that the actual land use management can have on the distribution of milkweeds in these different ecoregions of Texas. The last thing I want to talk about, and I'm close, is the pesticide story, and this is one that is perhaps the most important. What we're looking at here is this diagram shows the major crops grown in Texas and their phenology. Now, the point here is that in trying to determine the impact that pesticides are going to have, if you look at when cotton is planted in Uvalde versus when it's planted in the high plains, there's a great deal of difference for it. So the issue is where when are the pesticides being applied relative to when the monarchs are moving through the state. And that is probably more important in the spring migration than it is in the fall migration, although pecans are treated in the fall. So that's what the goal here is to look at when the insect is present relative to when pesticides are being applied, and you can envision that being kind of a cloud that moves across the state as that occurs. The lion or the elephant in the room is glyphosate. You can see that is basically 2,4-D. That's a compound, a herbicide, and you can look at how the use of glyphosate has increased exponentially almost throughout the last 20 or so years. The Roundup Ready cotton and the GMO plants that have that resistance built into it are the rationale for that. Okay, if you've got any questions, since you can't ask questions, don't throw stones, all right?